When we hear the word manipulation, I feel like the brain just instantly pulls up this very specific, almost cinematic file.
Oh, totally. Like a movie villain.
Right. You picture this, I don't know, Machiavellian guy operating in the shadows, or maybe some slick corporate shark pulling the strings just to get a promotion.
Yeah, it's a super loaded concept. It implies, well, a winner and a loser, basically.
Exactly. We always think of the puppet master and the puppet. It's a dynamic that's just built entirely on deceit.
And we're so conditioned to view any kind of influence through that zero-sum lens. The assumption is always that if someone is being manipulated, their autonomy is, like, actively being taken away.
Yeah, it's treated as this predatory act.
Right. It's rooted in coercion. We rarely ever stop to consider that manipulation could be anything other than this hostile takeover of someone else's agency.
But so what if that entire framework is just completely upside down? Like, what if the ultimate masterclass in manipulation doesn't actually come from some dark psychology textbook?
Or a cutthroat boardroom.
Right, exactly. What if it comes from a yogi? I mean, we're talking about the idea that the secret to successfully manipulating people might actually be the most wholesome, positive, internally grounded thing you could possibly do.
I mean, it sounds like a total paradox on the surface. Fusing that introspective piece of a yogic lifestyle with something as aggressive and outcome-driven as manipulation.
That's a massive pivot.
It really is. You basically have to completely deconstruct what it even means to influence a room.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive today. We are looking into this incredible talk given by Osman, who is widely known as the Blind Muslim Yogi. And his background is just this fascinating collision of worlds.
It really is. You don't usually see this kind of overlap.
Not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about an energy healer, a yoga and meditation teacher with, nearly 50 years of practice under his belt?
Yeah, 50 years. And he actually hit his first samadhi experience by the age of 19.
Wow, 19. And on top of all that ancient discipline, he also happens to be a highly successful entrepreneur with almost 3 decades of, really cutthroat business experience.
And I think that intersection is what makes his perspective so durable. You have these ancient introspective traditions colliding head-on with brutal, real-world metrics.
He's not just sitting on a mountain theorizing.
No, exactly. He's taking these spiritual frameworks and applying them to high-stakes environments just to see if they actually hold up under pressure.
So we're going to trace this wildly different definition of manipulation all the way from those mindfulness practices straight into the trenches of real estate sales and ultimately into this terrifying personal crisis.
Which is really the ultimate test of all this.
It really is. But before we plunge into the deep end,
Yeah.
I do want to give you, the listener, a quick bit of essential context here. Osman offers a free 5-minute yoga and meditation program, and you can actually download that right now over at his website.
That's yogawellness786.com, right?
Yep, yogawellness786.com.
Also, just to set the baseline, and he is incredibly clear about this in his own materials, his therapies and advice, they are natural.
Right, they're meant to be complementary.
Exactly. They are not replacements for medical treatments. If you have a medical condition, you should always consult a qualified, licensed medical professional. We just have to get that out of the way.
Absolutely. And there's actually one more really crucial piece of context regarding Osman himself that we need to mention.
Oh, right. The blindness.
Yeah. In May of 2023, Osman completely and permanently lost his eyesight.
Which is just wild to think about, because if you listen to his materials, he uses all this highly visual language.
Exactly. Throughout his videos, you'll hear him describe environments, colors, spaces, all of it. And that's because he actually had normal eyesight for the vast majority of his life prior to that sudden loss.
Right, and that catastrophic event really becomes the proving ground for his entire philosophy later on.
It's the ultimate stress test. So we'll explore how someone survives that kind of trauma without just completely losing their mind.
Yeah.
But to really understand his resilience, we have to start where he starts.
With the mind itself.
Right. With that quiet internal landscape. And Osman points out this really funny, almost tragic flaw in human nature.
Oh, the superpower thing.
Yes. He notes that a massive amount of people come to yoga or mindfulness looking for what are essentially superpowers. Like they sit cross-legged on a mat, hoping to unlock this secret telepathic formula to just force people to do their bidding.
They literally want Jedi mind tricks.
They really do.
And it just exposes this deep-seated shortcut mentality we all have. We constantly crave the result, right? We want absolute control over our chaotic lives and the unpredictable people in them.
But we don't want to do the unglamorous work.
Exactly. We approach these ancient, heavy disciplines like they're a cheat code we can just plug into a video game to bypass the hard levels of human interaction.
Well, Osman completely shatters that illusion. He argues that true manipulation has absolutely nothing to do with forcing someone's will. You're never, like, projecting your thoughts into their brain.
No, the secret is entirely 100% about balancing your own energy first.
Right. His core thesis is that if you take just 5 to 7 minutes a day to practice mindfulness, you become more centered. You become happier in your own skin. And that internal state is what actually manipulates the people around you.
So we're shifting the whole mechanism of influence here. It goes from active coercion to passive attraction.
Okay, break that down for us psychologically.
Sure. So in psychological terms, Osman is basically operationalizing this concept called effective presence.
Effective presence.
Yeah. And this isn't just about, having a good day. It's an actual measurable psychological phenomenon. It refers to the consistent emotional response that a person pulls out of the people around them, totally independent of their actual words.
Oh, wow. I've always thought of that, honestly, in terms of negative energy. Like, we all know that one person who can walk into a totally quiet, calm room, and within 5 minutes, everyone's blood pressure is just spiking.
Oh, absolutely. The anxiety level just skyrockets because of how they carry themselves or their micro-expressions or just that frantic energy.
Right. They just ruin the vibe without even speaking.
Exactly.
Oh.
But the reverse is equally true, and honestly, it's far more powerful. Individuals with a highly positive, effective presence have a baseline nervous system that is just so deeply regulated and calm.
And that affects everyone else.
Yeah. It acts like an emotional tuning fork for everyone in the room. Human beings have these things called mirror neurons, and they're constantly scanning the environment for emotional data.
Oh, so we're just copying them subconsciously.
Right. When we encounter someone who is deeply balanced, our own nervous systems subconsciously mimic that state. So when you're balanced, you naturally and effortlessly diffuse the tension of the people interacting with you.
I love that tuning fork analogy. But, it makes me think of something on a larger scale, too, like almost planetary. It's like gravity.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Like, you don't force objects to orbit you by reaching out and grabbing them with some invisible telepathic hand. That would require constant, exhausting effort. And the second you let go, they just fly away.
Right, you can't force an orbit.
Exactly. Instead, you just work on becoming a stable, massive planet. You increase your own density, your own center of gravity through that daily 5-minute practice, and the orbit just happens naturally. The planets around you can't help but fall into your gravitational pull.
Because your mass dictates the shape of the space around you. That physical analogy translates perfectly to social dynamics. If you're frantic or desperate or just vibrating with anxiety, you are actively repelling the very people you're trying to influence.
You're pushing them away while trying to grab them.
Exactly. By focusing entirely on your internal architecture, you alter the external environment simply by existing in it. From an evolutionary standpoint, we are instinctively drawn to individuals who are at ease.
Because it means it's safe.
Right. A calm nervous system signals environmental safety. We subconsciously trust people who aren't in a state of fight or flight.
Okay, let me push back on this a little bit, though.
Yeah.
Because I can hear the skepticism from someone listening right now.
Yeah.
On the surface, this sounds a bit like, an overly simplified self-help poster.
Just be a happy person.
Right. Just be nice and the world will bend to your will.
Yeah.
Like, how does internal peace actually translate to tangible transactional influence?
It's a fair question.
Because being a nice, peaceful guy is fantastic if you're, like, hosting a wellness retreat.
Mm-hmm.
But does it get the job done when you need a major favor?
Mm-hmm.
Or when you're trying to get a stubborn client to actually sign a contract?
And that is the critical leap we have to make here. It's why Osman's philosophy is way more strategic than just being nice. We have to look at the sequential chain reaction of human behavior.
Okay, walk us through the chain.
So, likability is not the end goal. It's merely the catalyst. When people interact with someone who is genuinely happy and easygoing, their amygdala, the brain's threat detector, it literally powers down.
So likability lowers the defenses.
Exactly. It systematically lowers defense mechanisms. And when defenses drop, trust begins to form. And trust is the absolute foundational currency of influence.
So it's this required progression. Internal balance creates the likability dismantles their defenses to create trust, and then the trust is what actually generates the willingness to help you.
That sequential flow is absolutely non-negotiable. And Osman connects this architecture of trust to Stephen Covey's classic framework in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Oh, right, the win-win principle.
Specifically that and the concept of the emotional bank account.
The emotional bank account is such a brilliant mental model. The whole idea that every single interaction you have is either a deposit or a withdrawal.
And Osman's application of it is incredibly disciplined. He really emphasizes that you must make deposits offering help, showing genuine interest, providing value without attaching any timeline for a return.
You can't expect a quick payout.
No, the moment you do a favor, while simultaneously holding out your hand for a reward, the interaction becomes transactional. And humans possess this highly evolved, hypersensitive radar for transactional behavior.
The cheater detection radar.
Yes, it triggers instantly. It feels inherently manipulative, but in the negative sense.
It feels gross. I mean, we've all been cornered at a networking event by someone who pretends to care about our weekend just so they can pitch us their startup 3 seconds later. You instantly throw up a wall.
Exactly.
So Osman is saying you use your balanced, likable state to just be relentlessly helpful. You make continuous compounding deposits into the emotional bank accounts of everyone in your orbit, knowing that the math will just eventually work out in your favor.
You're building a massive repository of goodwill. Because Osman points out a simple, undeniable truth. Nobody is all-powerful. Eventually, no matter who you are, you're going to need help.
Oh, for sure. You'll need a favor or an intro or a major sale.
Or desperate support during a life crisis. And if you've spent years diligently funding these emotional bank accounts simply by being a balanced, helpful presence, you suddenly find that you have an absolute army of people eager to assist you.
Wow. You are essentially manipulating the future by unconditionally investing in the present.
That's a great way to put it.
It completely redefines the word. You aren't tricking anyone into doing anything against their will. You've just organically engineered an environment where saying yes to you actually feels like a reward for them.
The manipulation is internal. You engineer the outcome by engineering yourself first.
Now, this all sounds beautiful in theory, right? Sitting on a cushion, radiating good vibes, slowly building emotional bank accounts over years.
Right, but the real world is vicious.
Exactly. Business is hyper-competitive, rent is due every 30 days. So let's look at how Osman actually applied this spiritual philosophy to a brutally competitive business environment. Does being balanced actually pay the bills?
We can definitely test the philosophy against reality here, and Osman's own career provides this very stark before and after case study.
He admits a deeply vulnerable truth about his early career, actually. For the first 6 years of his business journey, he failed miserably.
Yeah, he really struggled to stay afloat.
He notes that he possessed good communication skills, he had an even temperament, but he simply could not close sales. And, I mean, in business, no conversion mechanism means no income.
He had the product knowledge and the baseline communication, but he totally lacked the psychological mechanism to bridge the gap between their interest and their commitment.
Right. And he realized the missing link wasn't the quality of his real estate product. It wasn't his vocabulary. It was his inability to get the prospect to genuinely like and trust him in a high-stakes, highly transactional moment.
The pressure of the sale was overriding his baseline energy.
So he develops what he calls the 90-minute rule.
Which is really the practical, compressed application of that emotional bank account we just talked about. He took a concept that usually takes years to build and figured out how to execute it in a single meeting.
He figured out that if he could sit down and spend exactly 90 minutes in a single, deeply engaging conversation with a prospect, the eventual sale, at the very end of that conversation, became almost entirely effortless. The friction just evaporated.
But we have to analyze the sheer audacity of that time frame. An hour and a half is an absolute eternity in the context of sales.
Oh my gosh.
The immediate glaring question is, what is he doing for those 90 minutes to prevent the prospect from just walking out?
That is the exact pushback anyone in sales would have. How do you hold a prospect hostage in a chair for 90 minutes without them calling security?
Because the standard playbook is so different.
Right. Most salespeople walk into a room, pitch relentlessly for 89 minutes, and maybe pretend to listen for 1 minute while the client catches their breath. They just want to fire hose the prospect with specs, features, ROI calculations, and closing tactics.
Which is precisely why standard salespeople face so much rejection. Osman deployed the exact opposite approach. He utilized active strategic listening.
So he wasn't talking the whole time.
No, his secret wasn't a beautifully crafted 90-minute monologue. It was a relentless hunt for clues about what interested the prospect. He completely subordinated his own ego and his own agenda.
So he would walk into their office and, scan the environment.
Exactly. He'd look at the photos on the desk, the books on the shelf, or he'd just latch onto offhand comments about their weekend, and he would pivot the entire weight of the conversation to whatever they cared about.
This is incredibly counterintuitive, and it requires suppressing a massive amount of conversational narcissism.
It really does.
I mean, think about how agonizing it is when someone preaches to you about their own passions when you couldn't care less. Imagine you're exhausted, you just want to eat a greasy burger, and someone sits down and preaches to you for an hour about their hyper-healthy plant-based diet.
Or their marathon training.
Yes. You don't just tune them out, you actively begin to resent them.
And that resentment is just a defense mechanism against judgment. Osman is explicitly clear about this trap. He notes that pushing your good habits, even if they're objectively wonderful things like daily meditation or yoga or eating organic onto 99% of people, just creates instant negative friction.
Oh, because it feels like an attack.
Exactly. To the prospect, your helpful advice doesn't feel helpful. It feels like an indictment of their own lifestyle. It feels like you are challenging their comfort zone and establishing this moral hierarchy.
So he essentially says, I'm not here to be their parent.
Right. People have spent a lifetime building their habits. You cannot walk into an office and permanently alter their life trajectory with 2 minutes of unsolicited preaching.
So instead of evangelizing about his yoga practice or the incredible features of his real estate product, he just listens. He gets them talking about their absolute favorite subject in the universe, themselves.
Let's look at the underlying neurology of what he was doing during those 90 minutes. When a person speaks extensively about something they are deeply passionate about and they feel truly actively heard by the listener, their brain undergoes a literal chemical shift.
Really? Like actual dopamine?
Yes, the mesolimbic dopamine system lights up. Neuroimaging studies have shown that self-disclosure activates the exact same reward centers in the brain that respond to primary rewards like food or money.
Wow. So they were getting a high off the conversation.
Exactly. Osman wasn't just being a polite conversationalist, he was acting as a neurological dopamine facilitator. For 90 minutes, he provided an intensely rewarding biological experience by making these prospects feel incredibly interesting, validated, and valued.
Well, that explains the outcome perfectly. By the time the 90 minutes were up and he finally transitioned to bringing up his real estate service, the prospect's defenses weren't just lowered, they were completely dismantled.
They were chemically primed to trust him.
They genuinely liked him because he was the guy who just spent an hour and a half making them feel like the most fascinating person on earth. And the empirical results of this method are just staggering.
The conversion metrics are the ultimate validation of the theory here.
Yeah, so before this rule, his closing rate was an abysmal 1 in 50.
Which is brutal.
After implementing this deep listening strategy, it dropped to 1 in 20, then 1 in 5, and finally he hit the holy grail of sales, a 1-in-1 closing rate.
A 100% conversion rate.
For 4 consecutive years. Right around the 2004 to 2006 era, he sold a minimum of 20 houses a month.
It didn't matter if it was a holiday slump or the dead of winter.
Exactly. He was moving roughly 1,000 houses over a 4-year period.
And we also need to factor in the scale of those transactions. He wasn't just acting as a standard agent pulling a, 3% commission check. He was actively buying and flipping these properties for substantial profit.
Yeah, he notes that he was making roughly 5 times the normal commission amount on every single deal. He achieved a level of financial success that is honestly hard to fathom.
Living completely beyond his wildest dreams.
High rolling, being able to afford absolute anything he desired. And all of that material wealth was generated because he mastered the art of knowing how to speak to people by consciously choosing not to speak about himself.
Grounding the whole interaction in that balanced, profoundly prescient mindset.
Right.
And that concept of patience is the invisible engine driving the whole strategy. I mean, think about the immense internal regulation required to sit quietly and genuinely engage with someone else's mundane stories for 90 minutes when your own financial livelihood is on the line.
Most people would just be sweating trying to get to the pitch.
Right. Most salespeople leak desperation. They fidget, they interrupt, they try to rush the close, and desperation is a pungent odor that instantly kills trust. But because of Osman's foundational mindfulness practice, he never radiated that desperation.
He was capable of absorbing their energy and reflecting back pure curiosity and calm.
Exactly.
So the 90-minute rule built him an absolute empire.
Yeah.
But if we try to apply that same rule today, we run into a massive structural problem.
Oh, a huge one.
Osman himself acknowledges that the cultural and technological landscape has shifted violently since 2006.
The fundamental architecture of human attention has been entirely rewired.
Right. You simply cannot trap someone in a room and hold their attention for an hour and a half in a single sitting anymore. We live in an era of continuous partial attention.
So true.
So how does a philosophy built on deep, prolonged patience survive in a TikTok attention span world? How does the yogi adapt this rule for the smartphone era?
This is where we see the flexibility of his core principles. Osman recognizes that while the psychological mechanism of building trust remains identical, the delivery system basically has to evolve to match the environment.
Which brings us to his modern pivot, the 11 encounters principle.
Right.
Osman astutely points out that today, people are under a constant barrage of digital interruptions. Between social media feeds, text messages, emails, Slack notifications, the uninterrupted 90-minute conversation is essentially extinct.
It's an endangered species of communication. If you ask a modern prospect for a 90-minute introductory meeting, they will view it as an aggressive imposition on their time and immediately decline.
Oh, absolutely. So Osman's updated philosophy solves this by replacing the concept of duration with the concept of frequency. He hypothesizes that to build the requisite level of trust today, you need a minimum of 11 discrete encounters.
11 separate touch points. And if we analyze this through the lens of modern behavioral economics, he is brilliantly leveraging what psychologists call the mere exposure effect.
The mere exposure effect is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like when a new pop song comes on the radio and the first time you hear it, you absolutely hate it. It sounds grating.
Yeah, you just want to turn it off.
But by the 11th time it plays during your commute, you catch yourself tapping the steering wheel and humming along.
That is the exact mechanism. The mere exposure effect dictates that individuals tend to develop a strong preference for things merely because they are familiar with them.
So familiarity equals preference.
Exactly. The more frequently we are exposed to a face or a voice or an idea, the more our brains instinctively categorize it as trustworthy, provided our very first reaction wasn't aggressively negative.
It's an evolutionary shortcut.
It is. In ancestral environments, if we encountered a plant, an animal, or a person repeatedly and it didn't kill us, our nervous system gradually labeled it as safe. Familiarity breeds comfort.
So instead of trying to prove you are safe and trustworthy in one marathon 90-minute session, you distribute that proof across 11 low-friction, bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
Osman uses the highly relevant example of running a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
He argues that if you can get a prospective client to watch 11 of your videos, even if those videos are incredibly short, like 2 to 5 minutes long, it achieves the exact same compounding trust-building effect as the old 90-minute sit-down.
And let's do the math on that because the efficiency is striking. 11 videos at 3 minutes each is only 33 minutes of total aggregate exposure.
Wow, so it's a third of the time.
Right. But because that exposure is distributed chronologically over days or weeks, it tricks the brain into perceiving an ongoing, durable relationship. This ties directly into the modern psychological phenomenon of parasocial relationships.
Parasocial relationships, that's the dynamic where a viewer or a listener feels a deep personal connection to a podcaster or a YouTuber, right?
I get.
They feel like they genuinely know them as a close friend, even though the creator has no idea the viewer even exists.
Precisely. It is a one-sided intimacy built entirely on frequency and perceived authenticity. When you consistently show up in someone's digital feed, offering these micro deliveries of value, whether it's a helpful tip, a calming meditation, or some insightful piece of industry analysis, you are systematically funding that digital emotional bank account.
They get accustomed to the cadence of your voice.
They learn your mannerisms, and they subconsciously process your balanced baseline energy. By the time they hit that 11th encounter, the neurological defense mechanisms are completely powered down.
So they no longer view you as a stranger trying to extract their money.
No, they view you as a familiar, trusted advisor within your specific niche.
I really like that concept of micro-deliveries of value, because if you're listening to this right now and trying to land a massive promotion or win over an incredibly stubborn client, the takeaway isn't to force them into a 90-minute coffee meeting.
Please don't do that.
Right. The actionable question is, how can you engineer 11 low-friction, highly valuable micro-encounters for that boss or that client over the next 30 days. You're slowly dripping the essence of the 90-minute rule into their workflow.
And Osman promises that if your target audience resonates with what you deliver 11 times, the friction vanishes. They are ready to buy. They are ready to trust your recommendation.
This brings us to a crucial synthesis point for this entire discussion. We have to clearly redefine Osman's modern paradigm of manipulation, because we've traveled a tremendous distance from the Machiavellian shadowy puppet master we discussed at the very beginning.
You really have.
We need to crystallize this new definition. Osman defines manipulation in this context as simply getting someone to agree to take an action that is beneficial to you, but, and this is the massive non-negotiable caveat that separates it from coercion, it only works if that action is equally or even more beneficial to them.
It is the ultimate weaponized manifestation of the win-win principle, that manipulation doesn't occur at the point of decision.
Right. Where does it occur then?
It occurs in the meticulous engineering of the environment leading up to the decision. You have architected a scenario through your regulated internal energy, your extreme patience, and your calculated 11 micro-encounters where the other person actively desires to engage with you.
You haven't forced their hand or deceived them at all.
Not once. You have simply identified and systematically removed all the psychological friction and fear that would normally prevent them from moving forward.
You've made saying yes the most logical, comfortable, and biologically rewarding choice they could possibly make. I mean, it's almost shockingly wholesome, considering the word we are using to describe it.
It is entirely wholesome in its intent, but make no mistake, it is highly strategic and deeply calculated in its execution. That is the genius of it. You are respecting human psychology while simultaneously optimizing it for a mutual outcome.
This all sounds incredibly inspiring and intellectually neat, but if I'm being deeply cynical here, I have to point something out.
Go for it.
It is very easy to be a balanced, positive, radiant fountain of good advice when you are closing 100% of your real estate deals, flipping houses, and making millions of dollars. Like, anyone can be a Zen master when they're lounging on a yacht and the market is booming, right?
Oh, absolutely. That is the ultimate vulnerability of any success philosophy. The validity of a mindset isn't proven when the environment is perfectly tailored to your success. Prosperity masks fragility.
Exactly. The ultimate test of a philosophy isn't how elegantly it functions when you're winning at the game of life. The only true test is whether the psychological scaffolding holds up when the game turns vicious and you lose absolutely everything.
And that forces us to look at the ultimate stress test.
This is the moment where Osman's narrative violently shifts from an impressive, highly lucrative business case study into one of the most profound human survival stories I think I have ever encountered.
Yeah, it's pretty unbelievable.
Just over 2.5 years ago, in May of 2023, Osman's life was completely upended. He permanently lost his eyesight. And I want to reiterate this for you listening, as it's vital to the context. Osman had normal, highly functional vision for decades.
He wasn't born blind.
Right. He knew the colors of the sky, the faces of his family, the layout of the world. And then suddenly it was just gone.
We really have to comprehend the magnitude of that trauma. To suddenly and permanently lose a primary sensory input, especially the one that overwhelmingly anchors your spatial and physical orientation to reality, is a catastrophic psychological event.
I can't even imagine.
The standard medically recognized grieving process for sudden blindness is devastating. It involves profound, paralyzing depression, explosive anger, extended periods of denial, and a complete, terrifying loss of personal autonomy. The brain literally does not know how to process the sudden absence of the visual world.
Which is exactly what makes Osman's reaction so incredibly difficult to comprehend at first glance. When I was reviewing this material, I actually had to stop and reread it.
Yeah, his response was not typical.
Not at all. He didn't spiral into a deep depression. He didn't miss a beat in his daily life. He simply continued to work. He continued to support himself financially. He continued to live completely alone in his apartment.
And what is even more staggering is that he accomplished this without any formal mobility or orientation training.
Wait, really?
None.
None. The standard protocol for sudden blindness involves extensive rehabilitation, learning how to use a cane, learning Braille, undergoing months of occupational therapy just to navigate a kitchen safely. Osman bypassed all of that.
He didn't check into a facility to be taught how to exist as a blind person. He relied on pure internal innovation.
Exactly.
He looked at the problem logically and thought, There are thousands of visually impaired people out there who live completely independent, functional lives. If it is physically possible for them to do it, then there must be a mechanism for me to do it as well.
He took total ownership of it. He really did. So he painstakingly figured out the physical geometry of his space. He figured out how to sweep his floors by feel, how to manage his laundry, how to safely chop vegetables with a sharp knife in total darkness, how to blend his smoothies, and how to navigate the complex layout of his apartment without any assistance.
The contrast between Osman's internal psychological reality and the external reality of the people in his immediate environment is where the true power of his philosophy is revealed.
The juxtaposition is wild.
Mm.
While Osman is in his kitchen, calmly figuring out how to slice produce in the pitch black, his mother and his close family members were undergoing total emotional collapse.
They were absolutely devastated by his diagnosis.
They cried endlessly for weeks. They plunged into the exact deep depression that he was supposed to be experiencing. And who was managing the emotional fallout? Osman.
The man who had just gone permanently blind.
Yes, he was the one walking around, patting his family members on the back, motivating them, and assuring them that everything was going to be perfectly fine.
He was actively managing and regulating their emotional states because their nervous systems had completely overloaded, while his remained remarkably intact and functional.
I have to stop here and ask you to explain this from a clinical psychological perspective. Because to an outside observer, this sounds impossible.
It does seem impossible.
How is it neurologically or psychologically possible to just bypass the massive, overwhelming grieving process of losing a primary sense? On the surface, it sounds like massive psychological denial. But it can't be denial because he is actively physically functioning and adapting to his new reality.
Right, it is absolutely not denial, and it isn't bypassing the emotion either. What we are witnessing here is the deployment of a fundamentally different baseline of resilience.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Well, this forces us to question how the average person handles sudden adversity. Most of us, when tragedy strikes, rely entirely on the mechanism of willpower.
We just try to grit our teeth and bear it.
Exactly. We muscle through the pain, and we repeatedly tell ourselves an internal narrative. Be strong, don't break, you have to be okay. But Osman makes a critical, scientifically accurate observation here. You cannot simply instruct your brain to be okay in the face of catastrophic trauma.
Willpower is basically a flimsy shield against a hurricane.
Willpower is a heavily finite cognitive resource. It is subject to a phenomenon known as ego depletion.
Ego depletion?
Yeah. Under severe, prolonged stress, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for rational thought and emotional regulation, becomes exhausted and surrenders control to the amygdala, which triggers panic and despair.
So you just run out of gas.
Precisely. You simply cannot think your way out of a physiological and emotional collapse using just willpower. You require a mechanism. You need a deeply ingrained physical and psychological framework that automatically catches you when the brittle branch of willpower inevitably snaps.
And for Osman, that mechanism, that incredibly thick shock absorber, was his 50-year foundation of yoga, intensive breath work, and daily mindfulness.
Exactly. We return to the very beginning of the deep dive. Because Osman had spent 5 decades meticulously practicing the art of balancing his energy, dedicating those 5 to 7 minutes every single day to building that internal density, training his vagus nerve to command his nervous system to relax his baseline psychological state was utterly fortified.
So when the catastrophic crisis of blindness hit, he didn't have to scramble in the dark to find his center.
He was already standing on it. The external building shook violently, but the internal foundation was sunk deep into bedrock.
It's as if he had been diligently depositing tiny amounts of resilience into his own internal emotional bank account for 50 straight years. And when life suddenly demanded the largest, most devastating withdrawal imaginable, the account was so flush that the check didn't bounce. He was able to cover the cost of the trauma.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it. The exact same energetic practices and internal regulations he utilized to patiently manipulate the cutthroat real estate market were the practices he deployed to manipulate his own nervous system during a massive physiological trauma.
And a crucial component of that self-manipulation involves a very specific linguistic tool he uses, which he calls the power of incantation.
Right. Incantation is the conscious, repetitive directing of internal self-talk to literally rewire neural pathways. It leverages neuroplasticity.
He heavily highlights his reliance on positive incantations, and I absolutely love the specific quote he adopted as his personal mantra. Even after waking up to a world of permanent darkness, the phrase he repeats to himself is, "My future's so bright I gotta wear shades."
It has a wonderful sense of humor to it, but the psychological utility underneath that humor is incredibly profound.
It really is. By using that phrase, he is aggressively refusing to leave even a millimeter of room in his cognitive space for the word impossible. He operates on the absolute conviction that if he commands his brain to make something possible, his brain will eventually generate the physical solution to make it happen.
And this ultimately is the highest, most evolved form of his definition of manipulation.
He is manipulating his own mind, hacking his own perception of reality to actively and violently refuse the role of the victim.
He is deliberately overriding the default human software program that screams panic, surrender, and despair when a primary sense is loss, and he is forcefully installing a custom-programmed response that dictates adapt, innovate, and proceed.
It is genuinely staggering to think about the level of mental control that requires. Let's start bringing all these disparate threads together and synthesize the incredible arc of this journey we've been dissecting today.
It serves as a masterclass that forces us to reevaluate every assumption we hold about how we interact with our environment.
We kicked this off with the dark, coercive, Machiavellian concept of manipulation, the idea of forcing others to bend to your will. But Osman, drawing on a lifetime of experience as the blind Muslim yogi, demonstrated that to exert true, lasting, non-toxic influence over the external world, you must first achieve absolute mastery in manipulation over your internal world.
It is the ultimate inside-out approach to human dynamics.
And the beauty is that it doesn't require a mystical superpower. It starts incredibly small. It starts with a simple 5-minute daily commitment like utilizing the free resources he provides at yogawellness786.com to quietly center your mind and regulate your baseline energy.
And that internal balance naturally radiates outward into your environment. It acts as an emotional tuning fork, it diffuses ambient tension, and it fundamentally makes you a likable, safe presence.
And as we've established, that genuine likability is the essential key that unlocks the heavy door to deep trust.
Exactly. And once you have established that trust, you possess the currency to invest in others. Whether you are operating old school by spending 90 patient minutes deeply listening to a prospect's passions to trigger their dopamine response, or you are operating in the modern digital era across 11 carefully crafted encounters.
Dripping those microdeposits of value to leverage the mere exposure effect.
Right. That patient, ego-free investment builds an unshakable foundation for mutual success. It systematically engineers a genuine win-win scenario where people actually want to help you.
Yet the ultimate proof of the efficacy of this entire system isn't found in the thousands of real estate properties sold, the high closing rates, or the millions of dollars generated. The indisputable proof is found in the darkness.
It really is.
The proof is waking up one morning in May of 2023, confronting the terrifying reality that your vision is gone forever, and still possessing the internal fortitude to stand up, navigate to the kitchen, safely prepare your own breakfast, go back to work, and become the pillar of emotional support for your weeping family without missing a single beat.
Because your internal foundation is simply that unbreakable.
It definitively proves that true power has absolutely nothing to do with controlling the chaotic events that happen to you or manipulating the actions of the people around you. True power is possessing absolute, unyielding mastery over your own psychological response to those events.
And that profound realization leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to carry with you and mull over as you navigate the rest of your week.
If a foundation built on 5 minutes of daily internal balance provided a man with the strength to wake up completely, permanently blind, and yet continue working, thriving independently, and comforting his devastated family, what minor, incredibly trivial, everyday inconveniences are you currently allowing to completely derail your mindset?
It applies a remarkably sharp, sobering perspective to our daily list of grievances and frustrations.
It really does. The next time a sudden traffic jam makes your blood boil, or a passive-aggressive email from a coworker ruins your morning, or a spilled cup of coffee sends you into a downward spiral of frustration, pause, take a breath, and ask yourself a very serious question. Who or what is really manipulating your energy right now?